How's it going? My name is Anthony, and these are stories of my life. For those of you just joining us for the first time, these videos are a cognitive therapy tool for me. Basically, I've taken some head injuries over the years, my memory's failing, and the doctors have suggested I make these videos to preserve the memories I still have, as well as hopefully inspire some of you all to provide me with details I may have lost, or even remind me of events I've completely forgotten. In which case then I can either remake an old video with the new details or make a whole new video with new events. So I'm sure you get the idea. At any rate, the events of this video do take place in 1990. So I was 12 years old, still living at the house at 2917 Gertrude Street. Just finishing up school at Matthew Gage Middle School for 7th grade. And it was basically that summer is really what it came down to, and maybe even right up to the end of the school year. But anyway, my parents were separated and in the process of a divorce. They had finally come to the conclusion that they were not going to be able to reconcile anything, and so yeah, that was happening. My dad was still living at his nursery, my mom at the house. My dad could not get a new place to live because his name was still on everything for the house. You know, the mortgage, the utilities, everything. You know, his credit was stretched and he couldn't get approved for anything. So he was stuck living at his place of business. And in the whole divorce proceeding, my parents had finally came to what I believe was a loose agreement of my mother would keep the house, my father would keep the business, and then, they kind of bickered about some of the other smaller things, but for the most part, those weren't an issue. It was just really came down to the house and the business. And my mom was working as a cosmetology instructor at Riverside Community College's School of Beauty, as well as Marinello's School of Beauty in San Bernardino. And my mom had this idea that she would be able to pay for the house, if my dad gave it to her, that she could still cover the mortgage, cover the utilities, cover everything. I think in her head she had the notion that she would end up getting some alimony as well as the child support for custody of me. My dad wanted to be able to get out from underneath the house, get his own place, and then get custody of me as well. So it really came down to me, because without me, my mom couldn't afford the place, and my dad didn't want me to be with my mom, knowing that she was drinking and all of that. And so it ended up with this huge, bitter custody battle over me. And then I think also my mom ended up with the reality check of, regardless of whether or not you do get custody of Anthony, you're not going to be able to afford the house. I think that came straight from her attorney, just told her point blank. And I think she was mad because somewhere in there, maybe she had the delusion that my dad would still continue to help her. Because up to this point, they had been kosher, despite the fighting. If my mom needed anything at the house, something needed repaired, the yard to be taken care of, whatever it might be, my dad would do it. He wasn't living there, but he would come by and fix whatever it was for her and do all that. So he was still being cool like that. And then he would come over and do that, and my mom would see that he was starting to look a little scruffy, hair overgrown, whatever else, and my mom would make him sit down and she'd give him a haircut. And it was the strangest thing, because they were like frenemies, is really the best way to put it. They hated each other, but you could see that they loved each other. It was really weird. And but then when the whole reality check came down that my mom was not going to be able to afford the house, and my dad needed to get out from under it, at some point my mom just said, you know what, let's just split everything. Which is not what my dad wanted. My dad tried to fight that, but he lost, because they were in the state of California, and everything in California is community property. And so once that happens, everything's getting divvied up. So the house ended up getting sold, and proceeds split. Savings accounts split. The business had to be liquidated and split. The problem was, because of the bitter custody battle that went on, and all the fighting with the divorce, literally everything that we had financially, all the proceeds from the sale of the house and the liquidation of the business, ended up just going to the attorneys and or court fees. So it just was gone. My parents had put together a sizable account for me to go to college, and it was just gone. Everything gone. And which was upsetting to my dad, because his business was purchased with his father's money, and he was taking a lot of crap from his sisters, who had seen that as what should have been their inheritance also, and it was now gone. So they hated him for it. At least that's the way they explained it to me. But and I honestly, I can't say that I blame him for being upset in that scenario, but it is what it is. It wasn't his fault per se. But so now we lose our house, we lose a business. My mom, somewhere in there, stopped working at RCC, I think, and we didn't have anywhere to go. So we ended up homeless. And I think my mom, even around that time, got injured and wasn't working at Marinello's anymore either. Like she got hurt, so she didn't have an income at all. There was a big fight, I guess, at Marinello's School of Beauty, and she tried to get in the middle of it to break it up. And if you know my mom, she's this kind of dinky little thing. She got in between these two big girls and got either hit or thrown or something, and got hurt real bad. Neck, spinal injuries, and kind of messed up her ability to do anything with her hands. And so she couldn't work. And so now we end up homeless. And most kids, when they go through divorce in this scenario, they end up going from house to house. I literally went from car to truck. My mom was able to get on food stamps, and I think my dad was too. And so we were living off that for a while. That was quite literally how we ate. But I mean, that was limited because just it was. And I remember always being hungry, like starving, always being hungry that badly. And because finding food was it was tough. We didn't have it. And my mom would have to sell food stamps to get gas money to do whatever with the car, even just keep the air conditioning running so that we wouldn't get too hot or whatever it might be. I mean, even going to the bathroom is a pain in the ass because you got to drive somewhere that's okay with you coming in and using the bathroom. Usually a gas station, but I'm sure you get the idea. And that's how it was. It's just the way it was. Whether I was with my dad or with my mom, that was the way it was. My dad was living in his truck, so sleeping in that, it wasn't like one of us could be in the front seat and the back seat. We were literally just up against in the chairs sleeping. And yeah, that's what it was for a while. The custody battle was still going on though, and had gotten to a point where the courts had learned that my parents were homeless, and I believe they were on the verge of taking me away from them. So somehow, some way, my mother pulled off getting an apartment in downtown Riverside. I'm not sure how she did it. I don't know if it was government subsidized or if her Social Security disability claim went through and whatever. It might have been subsidized housing. I don't know. But we ended up in this apartment downtown. And it was a really shitty, just studio apartment. Studio apartment with just one room with the bedroom. And it was kind of where the bed fell from the wall. I don't remember what that's called, but anyway, bed fell from the wall, had a little bathroom area. Kitchen was kind of in with the main room. But I remember it was dirty. It was just so dirty. It felt like somebody hadn't cleaned in there in 20 years. It just was horrible. It was infested with roaches, and I remember mice being in there, and you could find little rat poops everywhere. It was so bad. And my mom did her best to get in there and clean it up as good as she could. But I got sick while I was there, and I was so sick. I can remember vomiting to the point where things I hadn't eaten, and I was still vomiting chunks and blood, and it was coming out my nose and both ends actually. And I just was so sick I thought I was going to die. And that went on for a while, and I don't remember about hospital visits or if I was diagnosed with anything specific or what, but I don't know. But that's the way living there was. And so at some point, my dad now was completely cleared of any debts or responsibilities he had related to the house. So now he was able to go get an apartment. More than that, he also was able to get a couple of jobs doing landscape maintenance for some of the customers that used to come into the nursery. And one of which actually was Malcolm Smith, because Malcolm Smith lived had his business across the street. And so my dad was now making money again, and was able to get an apartment. It wasn't in a great area, but it was still an apartment. It was down by Ramona High School. The apartment complex wasn't bad. It was just several buildings all lined up in a row, and right off of what is that, Magnolia Avenue? Right off Magnolia Avenue, because Ramona was down the street and down and across the street. And I remember they had a pool there. I can remember playing in the pool with a bunch of the other kids that lived there. I remember possums, walking by on the fence as we were in the pool. Those things are so cool. I love possums. But I can remember those. What was interesting about being there one time is my dad and I came home from somewhere, and we actually walked up to the door, and we found the door pried open. Literally, you can see a crowbar had pried the door open. My dad opens the door, and we walk in, like, what the hell? And in the living room, because as soon as you walk in, you got to go down 2 steps to be in the living room, or you go straight up to the upper floor. And in the living room, the TV was pulled down, VCRs, other electronics I had, all pulled and staged in the living room. And you can see fingerprints where they had touched the things on the top of the dust that had compiled on top. And my dad was like, oh crap, we're being robbed. And so he immediately ran and called the police. And while he's doing that, all of a sudden I hear some noise and everything upstairs. And I'm like, what the hell is that? So I go walking up the stairs. And sure enough, there's a couple guys upstairs, one of them with a gun, screaming, get the F out of here, and blah, 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 blah. I'm like, oh, crap. And I think one of them even said, oh, it's a kid. And they didn't want to come down and confront me, or whatever. Not because they were scared of me, obviously, but they just didn't want to have a child involved in whatever they were doing. And so they ended up opening the window upstairs, pushing out the screen, and then jumping out the second floor into the back patio, jumping the fence and taking off and running. And I finally ran back down. I was like, Dad, guess what's going on? Blah, 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 blah. So when he finally explained that to the cop that showed up later, because he had already hung up with 911 when I ran down, the cop was like, why didn't you tell us they were here? We would have rushed right over. Why wouldn't you rush right over anyway? But I don't know. So that was that. But yeah, now that my dad had a better place to live than what my mom had, I wanted to be at my dad's all the time because it was clean. So my mom was like, oh crap, well, let me go get a new place. And my mom ended up getting a place at a mobile home park up in Ritchie Canyon. And I'll get into that in the next video because that's its own thing. But and that was kind of how it was. It was hard. It was really hard being homeless, not having anything. And I think what made it so hard was that up to that point, I had gotten everything I wanted. Everything you can imagine. My dad had made great money from the nursery, so we had this really nice house. Anything that I needed, my parents got me. I had a computer, I had all the toys that I wanted, I had, you name it, I got it. And so I was essentially a spoiled brat. And I'll be the first one to tell you that. Spoiled brat. So I was a happy kid in that regard. The challenges I was dealing with, though, were obviously my mother's drinking. I was still struggling with this whole notion that these weren't my real parents and that my real parents didn't want me. So I still had that going on too. But otherwise, things weren't bad. It was the only thing I was dealing with. And then all of a sudden, boom, lost everything. gone. You're living in a car. You're living in a truck. You're not going to get to eat when you want to. Finding a place to take a dump is a pain in the ass. Whatever, and you name it, it was tough. Like, it was so hard. I can't tell you how many nights I went to sleep crying because of how bad everything was. And it sucked. And I think the thing that pissed me off more than anything was that we lost everything because of my parents' pride and ego. Literally. And I say that because I would listen to how my dad would talk about my mom, and I knew he still loved her. And I would listen to the way my mom would talk about my dad, and I knew she still loved him. And the way he would quickly jump to helping her with anything she needed. And she would be asking him questions, seeing how she could take care of him. And she would do that like crazy. They loved each other. They were just angry. Someone made the other mad, and then the other turned around and made the other mad, and that one turned around and made the other mad. And they couldn't get over it. They just could not get past it. And I would ask them about it. And it really just came down to their pride and their ego. They couldn't get past it because of their freaking pride and their ego. And, growing up, I look back on it and it just makes me so mad of what we lost and what I had to go through, and what they had to go through even because of that, because they couldn't control their pride and their ego. And I have never in my life, never once seen anyone in any kind of scenario where your pride benefited you, where your ego benefited you in the long term. We're doing something or not doing something because of pride. I'm too proud to do that. It doesn't benefit you. It's a bunch of bullshit. You're a stupid saying, your ego is not your amigo, but it's true. It's absolutely true. So if you find yourself in a scenario where your pride's holding you back from doing something or saying something, or your pride's forcing you to do something, or your ego's doing that, just put yourself in check. God, don't be stupid. Don't ruin things for yourself. My dad ended up dying alone. He was living at a senior citizens facility in Riverside. A lonely old man. My mom was no different when she died. Had her own room at somebody's house that she was taking care of, because she died old and lonely. But even up to the day they died, my dad used to talk about how he still loved my mom right up to the day he died. And then after my dad died, right up to the day she died, my mom used to talk about how she still loved my dad and never wanted to marry anybody else. Stupid. So freaking stupid. Please don't make that mistake. So if you take anything from this, please don't make those mistakes. Your ego is not your amigo, and your pride is not going to do you any good in the long run. So, anyway, I appreciate you watching it. Sorry to preach, but it is what it is. If you like the video, hit like. If you want me to leave a comment, leave a comment. If you got a story of your own, I'd love to hear it. I like hearing other people's stories. So, anyway, thank you again.